As you may already know, my name's Clare Baker, and I'm a former clutterholic and borderline hoarder. I successfully cleared all my clutter over 20 years ago without the need for an expensive home visit, and I've been helping people around the world do exactly the same ever since, so that they too can know what it's like to live a clutter-free life forever. I like to share my experiences both before and after I cleared my clutter to help fellow clutterholics and hoarders and their friends and family to illustrate some of the thoughts, feelings, and experiences we have when we struggle with our clutter. What I share is not intended to be a judgment or criticism of anyone I mention, although I completely understand that some people may take it that way. There are always at least three perspectives on the same experience: yours, mine, and the facts of the experience that probably lay somewhere in between. I share my perspective on my experiences, which is a reflection from which I can share my learning with others who may have had similar experiences. It wasn't until I started to clear my clutter with the support of a therapist that I came to learn that what I had always believed was a comfortable and normal childhood was what other people called uncomfortable. Feeling uncomfortable was so normal for me that it was comfortable. I never knew there was a comfort zone until my late 20s, so it's not a surprise that I was comfortable with my clutter while those around me were baffled as to how I could live like that. It's important to acknowledge that there are different types of comfortable: physical, emotional, financial, etc. I didn't know that there were different ones, and I didn't know the difference between them, having grown up in a family where the only comfort that seemed to matter was financial comfort and security. My parents only ever focused on and prioritized financial comfort and stability, having not grown up with it themselves. Money and material possessions were serious things to be taken seriously, not enjoyed or joked about. My parents bought me my first car, but they made it very clear that it was bought with inheritance tax allowance money. My 18th and 21st birthdays were not celebrated beyond the usual family birthday meal out. No surprise then that my clutter epitomized what my parents considered wasteful and unnecessary frivolity, excess, luxury, unnecessary rewards. To the outside world, I grew up in a privileged family. My graduation, compared to my birthdays, was celebrated with a dinner at a local Hilton hotel with more of my parents' friends than my own. Achievements were recognized and celebrated. Existing and just having a birthday, not so much. We lived in a 5-bedroomed house. My mother was a stay-at-home mother who didn't have to go out to work. My brother and I were educated privately. We were a 2-car family. We had 2 black Labradors. We had holidays abroad and a caravan. Although I don't know what they were thinking. We didn't get on as a family in a 5-bedroomed house, so my brother and I were virtual strangers because he was away at boarding school. What made them think that we'd get on in a confined tin can in the middle of a field? My brother was sent off to boarding school at the age of 8, and I only saw him during the holidays, so I felt like an only child for much of my childhood. Describing my brother Simon going to school in a letter to her parents, my mother wrote, "I have been amazed at the release of pressure on me with only one child at home to deal with." I was then at home alone from the age of 5 to 12 with a narcissistic mother who had undiagnosed and untreated severe postnatal depression and undiagnosed manic depression. Now, I understand these 2 conditions explain a lot of her behavior in my childhood, and it explains my father's protectiveness of her. It took me a long time to realize that and understand why someone behaves the way they do. Actually, that allows you to forgive them when you understand. It doesn't mean you have to continue to accept their behavior, especially if they don't see anything wrong with their behavior. My mother has no maternal or nurturing instincts or desire. My father is also narcissistic. Of 17 recognized signs of narcissistic parents, my parents score 16. Combined with issues from their own childhood and a lack of self-awareness about their issues, I have come to learn and understand that my parents were not capable of nurturing or raising happy, emotionally healthy, independent children. When I was growing up, being uncomfortable was my norm, my comfort zone. My father was rarely at home due to work, so I was at home with my mother, who, due to her undiagnosed conditions, could switch from Jekyll to Hyde in a heartbeat. Even the dogs knew when it was best to stay in their dog baskets to avoid the verbal firing line. I never questioned or complained, but when I started to have play dates and see my friends' mothers hugging, kissing, helping with homework, listening, and shock horror, asking us all for our opinions and thoughts, I noticed how much more relaxed and comfortable their home lives were compared to my own. One benefit of learning is that we have the feedback from our experiences to inform our thoughts and future decisions. And it was this that helped me to understand why I was so uncomfortable at home, even though I was powerless to change it. I learnt to explain it as my parents caring and being overprotective. My privileged upbringing meant that I was completely dependent on my parents mentally, financially, practically. I rarely made a decision without asking them first. Sadly, any challenge or attempt to connect on an emotional level was ignored as irrelevant. All that mattered was being financially secure. Talking about feelings or debating things were never encouraged and always dismissed. I was repeatedly told that I was ungrateful if I asked for anything or questioned a decision that was made for me. We never had impromptu, casual conversations about day-to-day things or events. Conversations were always scheduled and planned for, and they had to have a clear purpose. In my 20s, they were even treated as business meetings with a written agenda. My brother and I became experts at presenting any request for financial help or support in a way that we knew that they would approve. We even gave evidence in spreadsheets. Yet I yearned for emotional comfort and safety, a safe place where I could work out who I was. I couldn't relate to my friends going through the teenage rebellion stage, testing boundaries, learning to think abstractly, questioning things. I was used to doing as expected, trying to please my mother in the hopes of getting a sign that she loved me unconditionally, doing what I was told, accepting my parents as knowing what was best for me, and not questioning anything. What I found uncomfortable when I did my life timeline exercise, when I started clearing my clutter, was to see all these things clearly and to see how, for me, they had culminated in my making a connection to my pets and my clutter, which gave me the unconditional emotional comfort and safety I didn't get from my parents. Talking to them about what I needed wasn't an option. My clutter was the only way I could express myself or get an emotional response from them, negative, of course. When I realized the connection between my uncomfortable life and my clutter, I went to my therapist. I told her I felt emotionally numb, that I felt more for my pets and my clutter than my parents, and that I realized I had learned to never risk being vulnerable by expressing myself or sharing my feelings with people. As I sat in that little red room in the therapy rooms in Covent Garden, Meg asked me, "When was the last time your parents told you they loved you?" I looked at her blankly. The tears rolled down my face as we sat with the discomfort of that void in my life. I came to understand that I never felt emotionally safe, and my parents never taught me that it's okay and safe to feel vulnerable and uncomfortable in our family. My clutter was my attempt to self-soothe, as was my overeating and my unhappy relationships with men who were never committed long-term life partner prospects. My 20s were full of life clutter and poor decisions. They represented the teenage rebellion I had never experienced because I was busy being uncomfortable to make my parents comfortable. I was too busy being the good girl, hoping to get approval. I finally realized I needed to get comfortable being uncomfortable if I wanted to clear my clutter. I had to accept that dealing with my clutter would cause a shift in my relationship with my parents. I decided that my comfort was more important than their comfort. I accepted that they never had and were unlikely to ever be willing to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I realized that I had to choose between staying in their comfort zone with them or stepping outside to find mine and start living my best life. I can still remember sitting on the London Underground tube train on my way home from that therapy session, having realized that clearing my clutter was about to get uncomfortable for me and my family, and that if the only way I could start living my best life was to get comfortable being uncomfortable, then that was what I had to do.